Hi everyone. So in this video we are going to discuss about Citrix virtual apps and desktop with Azure Conditional Access Policy. So Azure Conditional Access Policy, it is a tool in Azure Active Directory to bring signals together to make decisions and enforce organizational policies. So as you see in the diagram, using various conditions, for example the user location or the application or the device status or the real-time risk associated with the users. So using all these things, you can apply conditions to user connection, whether to allow or deny the connection to your Citrix virtual apps and desktop. Also you can enforce MFA based on the user condition. So you can use Azure Conditional Policy for your CVAD service so that you can enhance and secure your virtual apps and desktop environment. So let's go to our whiteboard to check this in detail. So in a cloud environment, so typically we will have Azure Active Directory, which we call it as AAD. Then we have a user which is maybe in the internet or in the corp network. Then in the other side we may have Citrix CVAD service, we may have Teams O365, or we may have Azure Virtual Desktop. So all these things are integrated with Azure Active Directory. So in a typical scenario, when we integrate Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Services Azure Active Directory, the user will log into your Citrix workspace. So workspace will redirect back to Azure Active Directory for the authentication. So once you enter the valid credential, Azure Active Directory will verify the credential and it will allow the access to the CVAD services. So this is the normal authentication behavior when we integrate your CVAD service with Azure Active Directory. Let's go to conditional access policy and how it will help you to secure your environment. So when you enable conditional access policy, it is a feature in Azure Active Directory. So we need to create a policy which is conditional access policy. We normally call it as CA policy. So you can enforce MFA, multi-factor authentication, for your users. So let's say if the user is coming from internet or any other locations, so based on the condition whether he is coming from internet, then you can enforce MFA. Or if he is coming from corporate network, which is already trusted network, then you can bypass MFA using conditional access policy, so that all the traffic which is generating from your network, that is your corporate network or your office, it won't apply MFA, but all the traffic which is initiating apart from your corporate network, then it will enforce MFA. This is the first scenario. Second scenario related to block. So if the user traffic is initiating from the other region, for example your company is located in UAE, and if you don't want to allow CVAD service to your users to access from any location apart from UAE, then you can apply block policy using conditional access. So what it will do, if the user is coming from UAE, this conditional access block policy will check whether the user traffic is initiating from UAE region, then it will allow. If it is coming from any other region or any other country, it will simply deny the connection, so that you can secure your CVAD environment from attackers or malicious traffic which is initiating outside your region. Similarly, you can whitelist IP address, corporate IP address. So corporate public IP address is normally your proxy IP address. So if you whitelist your corporate public IP address, that is your proxy IP address, here in this block policy, so you can allow the connection only from your office or corporate network, and you can deny the connection to your CVAD service from any other IP address, so that you can secure your CVAD environment and it will be accessible only from your corporate proxy IP address. This is the second scenario. Similarly, the third one, and which is very interesting one, is hybrid device. So hybrid device is nothing but the device, the client device, which is joined to both Active Directory as well as Azure Active Directory. So this is typically your corporate devices. Okay, so if you have a scenario where you want to allow CVAD to be accessed only from the corporate device, it should not be allowed from personal device, then you have a conditional access policy to allow only the hybrid devices. So conditional access policy, CA policy, whenever the user try to log into your Azure Active Directory to access CVAD service, this conditional policy, it will check whether the user device joined to hybrid AD or not. So if it is a hybrid device, then it will allow the access to your CVAD service. If it is the traffic is not coming from hybrid device, then it will deny the connection, so that you can restrict access to your CVAD service only from the corporate device. Okay, so this is a very useful policy if you are using a financial application in your CVAD, so that you can restrict accessing financial applications inside VDI from personal devices, so that let's say in the personal device they can take a screenshot, they can record the screen, and they can take the client banking information, etc., if it is a financial institute. So using this policy, you can restrict that and you can allow them to access only from the hybrid device. So this is a brief about conditional access policy. Let's see the demo. Let's see how to configure Azure conditional access policy to enforce Azure MFA to our Citrix workspace or CVAD service. So first we need to go to policies. So we need to click on new policy. We have to give the name for the policy. So let's begin with the name MFA. So here in the assignment, we need to select the user or user group on which we need MFA. So for this demo, I'm going to select my user, which is AAD test2. I'm clicking select. So in your scenario, you can choose the groups. Then we need to go to cloud apps and actions. Under apps, we need to select apps, and here we need to type Citrix, and we need to select the first one. Okay, this is for the workspace application. So the second one, it is for the administrator login for the Citrix cloud. So we are going to enable MFA only for the Citrix workspace users or our CVAD services. So select. Then under condition, so we can select the condition on which we need to enforce MFA. The first one is user risk. So user risk is nothing but if the user connection is coming from a suspicious IP address or some suspicious Tor IPs, then it will detect as user risk and it will enforce MFA. Then we have sign-in risk. Sign-in risk is nothing but, let's say if the user 1, he logged in from India, and after 2 minutes if he tried to log in from USA location, then it will detect as sign-in risk, because it is impossible to travel from India to US in 2 minutes. So it will consider a sign-in risk and it will enforce MFA. Then we have device platform. Here you can select if the user is connecting from any platform. For example, if he is connecting from Mac OS, then enforce MFA. Accordingly, if you wanted to enforce MFA if the user is accessing from Android or iOS, so you can select this platform and you can enforce MFA. Then we have locations. So if you wanted to enforce MFA from any specific location, then we can configure this as well. So we will come to this later. Then we have client apps. So here you can enforce MFA based on browser or mobile application and desktop client. So based on the type of device application, whether it is browser or it is a mobile apps or thick client, so you can enable MFA accordingly. So Then we have access control. So here we need to enable grant access, then we need to enable require multi-factor authentication. So the moment you select require multi-factor authentication, then this user, if he is accessing Citrix workspace or CVAD service, then he must use MFA to log in. So this is the grant option here. So let's try only with MFA for now, then select this option. Then we need to enable the policy, so we have to select on, then we will hit on create. So now it created a policy for the user AAD test2 on Citrix CVAD service app. So it will enforce MFA irrespective of any condition. So let's go to the portal and let's try to access and see whether it is enforcing the MFA or not. So I'm going to browse my Citrix workspace URL. So it will redirect to my Azure Active Directory page because I have integrated with Azure AD. Let's log in with the user. I'm going to enter the password for this user. As you noticed, it will enforce MFA. So once I click on my phone number, so it will send a MFA to my mobile. So I have received the MFA code, so let's enter the MFA code here. I'm going to verify it. So it will redirect it to the page. So now I can launch my VDI from here. So we have enforced MFA through conditional policy to our Citrix CVAD service. So let's look into one more scenario. Let's go back to the portal again. Think about this scenario now. So now you are logging in from trusted location. Trusted location, either it may be your corporate network or your home country. So for example, if the traffic is coming or user session is coming from a trusted IP, so you do not want to enforce MFA. But if the traffic is coming from anywhere outside this region or the IP address, so you have to enforce MFA. So first, to do that, we need to define the named location. So we will go to named location. So I am going to create IP range location. So here I am going to mention my IP. So in this example, I am going to get my IP address. So this is my public IP address. So I don't want to apply MFA if the traffic is coming from this IP. So first I need to whitelist my IP here in the portal. So I'm going to add IP address. So this is /32 is the net mask. So if you have range of IP address, you have to choose the net mask accordingly. Then click on add and then click on create. Similarly, you can add countries also. For example, my location, I am based in UAE for now, and I don't want MFA if the traffic is coming from UAE. So I'm going to select UAE here. So now I have my IP address as well as my location, which is a country UAE. So now let's go back to our policy again. Select MFA, the same policy. Then we need to go to conditions. Okay. So under conditions, we are going to select location and we have to enable configure. Then include all the location and exclude the location which we created. Okay. So I'm going to select my IP as well as the country. Okay, so as per your requirement, you can choose only your IPs or your countries. It's totally depends on the requirement. So I'm going to select now. Then I'll go and save the configuration. So now as per this policy, it should enforce MFA if the connection is coming from all the location or all the IPs except UAE and my public IP address. Let's go to Citrix portal again, workspace portal. So I am launching my CVAD workspace portal. I'm going to enter the same user and the password as well. So as per our policy, so it should not ask for MFA now because my IP is whitelisted and I'm coming, the traffic is initiating from UAE location. So let's do sign in. So as you can see, it did not enforce MFA now. So I can successfully able to log without MFA, because we have did a exception for the IP and country. So now I am in my workspace page where I can launch my VDI, and this time it did not prompt for MFA. And let's say if the user is trying to access from other country or other public IP address, then it should enforce MFA on the connection. So here in my Azure I have a VM which is hosted in Central US. So let's log into our Citrix VDA portal from Central US, and let's see it is prompting for MFA as per our policy. So now I logged into the Central US VM. So I'm logging into my, it will redirect to the Azure Active Directory page, and I'm entering my username. I'll enter the credential as well. So now as per our policy, you should enforce MFA because it is outside UAE or my public IP address. So as you notice, it is prompting for MFA for the same user, because this is outside UAE and it is a different public IP address rather than which I whitelisted. So this is how you can enforce MFA based on different conditions such as sign-in risk, user risk, location, applications, etc. So let's look into the new scenario, how we can block access to our Citrix virtual apps and desktop service based on different conditions. So let's configure the block policy. So we need to go to policy again, and we need to click on create. I'm going to create block policy. I'm going to assign the policy for the same user. Then under cloud apps and action, I'm going to select my Citrix virtual apps and desktop. So we will select the apps. This is the workspace app, and under condition we will go to locations, and under location we will say configure, and then we will exclude our location, that is my public IP address and my country. So in this example we are going to block all the connection to our Citrix virtual apps and desktop service from the entire world except from my public IP address and from my country, that is UAE. So similarly, in a corporate environment you can whitelist your corporate proxy IP address here, so that all the connection going through your corporate public proxy IP address, it will be allowed, and anything apart from that you can block. Similarly, under client tabs, if you want to restrict your access to CVAD only from browser, you can select that, and rest everything you can block. So in this example I'm not going to select anything. I am going to allow from browser as well as mobile and desktop client workspace application as well. Then I need to go to grant. Here I need to select block access. So now if I select block access, so it will check the condition. If the user is accessing my Citrix virtual apps and desktop service from the selected location or the IP address, then only it will allow, and otherwise it will block the connections. So click on select, then click on enable policy, then create the policy. So now it created the policy. So now let's go back to the portal and try to access our CVAD service from trusted IP address or the country, which is United Arab Emirates, and we'll see whether it is allowing or it is blocking the access. As per our policy, it should allow. So let's open a new window here. So I'm accessing the URL for my workspace app. Here I'm going to enter my username and password as well. So now as you see, it allowed me to access my Citrix virtual apps on desktop service, and I can able to launch the VDI because the connectivity or the traffic is coming from a trusted IP address which is whitelisted in my policy. Also it is coming from the country which I whitelisted as well. So now let's go back to our Azure VM which is hosted in Central US, and we'll try to access. So as per our policy, it should block the connection from Central US. So now I'm inside the VM which is my Central US VM. I'm going to access the Citrix workspace URL. I'm going to enter the username and I'm going to enter the password as well. So now you can see we are getting error. It says you cannot access this right now because your sign in was successful but does not meet criteria to access the resources. For example, you might be signing from a browser, app or location that is restricted by your admin. So it means our policy is blocking any connectivity to Citrix virtual apps and desktop service from any other region or location or IP address apart from what we have whitelisted. So using this way you can block access to your CVAD service based on the country, region, IP address and various conditions such as browser or the client, and there are many other which I have shown earlier. In this video we have seen how to use Azure Conditional Access Policy to secure your virtual apps and desktop service. So if you find this video useful, please subscribe to my channel, that is VDI Buzz, and share it with your friends and community as well. Thank you.